The city streets were quiet that evening, just the occasional car passing by and the distant sound of sirens somewhere across town. The street lamps cast long shadows on the sidewalk as a woman in blue scrubs made her way home. Her steps were quick but tired after a 12-hour shift at Metro General Hospital. She wasn't tall, maybe 5'4", with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her backpack hung heavy on her shoulders, filled with a change of clothes, an empty lunch container, and a half-read paperback. Anyone looking at her would see just another tired healthcare worker heading home after a long day of helping others. The woman checked her watch, 11:40 p.m. Her cat would be waiting impatiently for dinner. She smiled thinking about the grumpy orange tabby that had adopted her 3 years ago when she found him hiding under her porch during a thunderstorm. Now he ruled her small apartment like it was his personal kingdom. She decided to take her usual shortcut through Riverside Park. During the day, the park was filled with families, joggers, and people walking their dogs. But at this hour, it was mostly empty. She'd taken this route hundreds of times before without incident. The park cut 15 minutes off her walk, and after standing for most of her shift, those 15 minutes meant everything to her aching feet. The entrance to the park was well lit, but as she walked deeper along the path, the spaces between streetlights grew longer. The woman pulled her phone from her pocket, turning on its flashlight to help guide her way. The beam bounced off the path ahead, catching glimpses of empty benches and swaying tree branches. Her mind wandered as she walked. The day had been particularly tough. A bus accident had brought in 17 patients all at once, and the emergency room had been chaos for hours. As the charge nurse, she'd coordinated everything from triage to keeping family members updated. By the end of her shift, she was running on nothing but determination and her third cup of coffee. Tomorrow was her day off, and she planned to do absolutely nothing. Maybe she'd order takeout from that new Thai place down the street, or finally finish that mystery novel she'd been reading for weeks. The simple pleasures of ordinary life felt like luxuries after days like today. The park was eerily quiet. Usually, there would be at least a few late-night dog walkers or couples taking a romantic stroll, but tonight it seemed she had the place to herself. The only sounds were the rustling leaves and the distant hum of city traffic beyond the park boundaries. She noticed a cluster of trees ahead where the path curved around a small pond. The area was darker than the rest of the path, with the nearest streetlight flickering weakly. Something about it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Maybe it was just her imagination or the stories from patients she'd treated, victims of late-night attacks who'd come through her emergency room doors. For just a moment, she considered turning back and taking the longer route home. But home was closer through the park, and her feet were killing her. "Don't be silly," she told herself. "You've walked this way 100 times." She tightened her grip on her phone and picked up her pace slightly. The faster she moved through the dark patch, the sooner she'd be back in the well-lit section near the eastern exit, just 3 blocks from her apartment building. What she didn't notice was the figure standing perfectly still among the trees, watching her approach, waiting for the right moment. Someone who saw not a skilled healthcare professional who had saved countless lives, but an easy target walking alone at night. As she reached the darkest section of the path, the woman suddenly felt that she wasn't alone. Before she could react, a shadow moved quickly from between the trees, stepping directly into her path. The peaceful night was about to change in ways neither of them could imagine. The man stepped forward, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a dark hoodie. "Give me your bag and phone," he demanded, his voice low and threatening. His sudden appearance made the nurse freeze in her tracks, her tired mind trying to process what was happening. She clutched her backpack straps tighter, a reflex born of instinct rather than defiance. The bag didn't hold much of value, just her worn wallet with about $40 cash, her ID cards, and the novel she'd been reading on breaks. But it was hers, and something in her hesitated. "I don't want trouble," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the hammering in her chest. "I just want to get home." The man took another step closer. He was taller than her by at least 6 inches, with broad shoulders that blocked the dim light from the distant street lamp. "I'm not asking," he growled, reaching out to grab her arm with unexpected force. Her muscles tensed at his touch. The nurse had dealt with aggressive patients before. people in pain, scared, sometimes even those affected by drugs. She'd learned to stay calm, to de-escalate. But this was different. This wasn't the hospital with security just a button press away. "Take it easy," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "You can have my phone. Just let me go, and I'll." The man didn't let her finish. Impatient and agitated, he lashed out, striking her across the face with an open palm. The blow wasn't designed to injure seriously, just to scare, to show who was in control. The stinging impact snapped her head to the side and sent a shock through her entire body. For a split second, everything seemed to slow down. The nurse felt the burn where his hand had connected with her cheek. She tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her lip. The park around them seemed unnaturally quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. "Don't make me hurt you more," the man said, his voice colder now. "Just give me what I want." What the attacker couldn't see was the change happening behind the nurse's eyes. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something else entirely. The fear was still there, of course it was, but now it had company, a flash of anger, a spark of determination. He picked her because she looked like an easy target. A tired woman walking alone at night, small, vulnerable. What he couldn't know was that beneath the scrubs and the exhaustion was someone who had made a promise to herself years ago never to be a victim. The nurse had seen too many broken bodies rolled into her ER. Too many people who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who'd encountered someone like the man standing before her now. After the third assault victim she'd treated in a single night shift, she'd signed up for her first self-defense class. That was 4 years ago. Now, as she touched her fingers to her stinging cheek, something clicked into place. Her stance shifted slightly. A subtle change the attacker didn't notice. Her breathing steadied as muscle memory from countless training sessions began to awaken. The man reached for her backpack, his fingers closing around the strap, yanking it toward him. "I said give it to me." But the nurse was no longer paralyzed by fear. Her mind had cleared, time seemed to speed up again, and she made a split-second decision. This wasn't going to go the way he planned. This wasn't going to be another sad story on the evening news. As he pulled on her bag, trying to wrench it from her shoulder, she moved, not backward in retreat as he expected, but forward, directly toward the danger. The expression on her face changed from shock to focused intensity. The attacker had just made a terrible mistake. He had hit the wrong woman. The nurse's mind cleared completely as her training took over. 40 years of twice-weekly classes had prepared her body to respond automatically, without conscious thought. Her instructor's voice echoed in her head. "You don't rise to the occasion in a crisis, you fall to your level of training." The attacker still had his hand gripping her backpack strap, pulling hard. He expected fear. He expected begging. What he got was something entirely different. In one fluid motion, the nurse dropped her weight and twisted her body, breaking his grip on her bag. The move created distance between them, the first rule of self-defense. Never stay within striking range if you can help it. The attacker's eyes widened slightly beneath his hood. This wasn't going according to plan. Most people froze when confronted, especially after being hit. But the woman in front of him was moving with purpose, her stance changing into something he hadn't anticipated. "Back off now," she said, her voice firm and steady. "Just walk away." She gave him one chance, not out of fear, but because she didn't want this fight. Even now, the healthcare worker in her preferred de-escalation over conflict. The man laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet park. "Playing tough, huh?" He lunged forward, reaching for her throat with his right hand, while clenching his left into a fist. But the nurse was ready. As his arm extended toward her, she stepped sideways, deflecting his grab with her forearm in a sweeping motion that pushed his arm away from her center line. At the same time, her other hand formed a tight fist that she drove into his exposed ribs. The impact was solid. The attacker grunted in surprise and pain as the air rushed from his lungs. He hadn't expected resistance, and he certainly hadn't expected her to know how to fight. The nurse didn't stop there. Her instructor had drilled it into her head. Once you start defending yourself, you don't pause until the threat is neutralized. She followed the rib strike with a sharp knee to his thigh, targeting the nerve cluster that could temporarily weaken the leg. The man stumbled, his balance compromised. His face contorted with a mixture of pain and rage. "You're gonna regret that," he snarled, recovering enough to swing wildly at her head. She ducked under his punch, feeling the air disturbed by his fist as it passed inches from her face. She countered with an upward palm strike aimed at his chin, a move designed to snap the head back and disorient. The strike connected with enough force to make the attacker's teeth clack together painfully. He staggered backward, momentarily dazed. Blood began to trickle from his lip where he'd bitten himself from the impact. For a brief moment, the nurse felt a surge of exhilaration. Her training was working. The countless hours of practice, the muscle soreness after difficult sessions, the weekends spent at self-defense workshops, it was all paying off when she needed it most. But she knew better than to get overconfident. The man was larger and stronger, and despite being on the defensive now, he was far from defeated. She could see the shift in his eyes as surprise gave way to focused anger. He wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he growled, reaching behind his back. The nurse's stomach dropped as she realized he might be reaching for a weapon. Her instructor's words came back to her once more. "If you suspect a weapon, create distance immediately." She backpedaled quickly, putting more space between them. Her mind raced through her options. Running might be safest, but turning her back on a potentially armed attacker was risky. Standing her ground might be necessary. The park path stretched empty behind her. No one was coming to help. Whatever happened next, she was on her own, just her training against his rage. The attacker pulled his hand back from behind his waist, and the nurse braced herself for what would come next. The attacker's hand emerged from behind his back holding not a knife or gun as the nurse had feared, but a small canister. Pepper spray. Still dangerous, but not deadly. She had only seconds to react. "Let's see how tough you are now," he growled, raising the canister toward her face. The nurse's training kicked in once more. Her instructor had prepared the class for this exact scenario. If someone threatens you with pepper spray, protect your eyes and breathe through your shirt, not your nose. She turned her head sideways and raised her arm to shield her eyes just as the attacker pressed the button. The burning mist shot out, but most of it went past her, carried away by the light evening breeze. Only a small amount caught her arm and shoulder, enough to cause discomfort but not enough to disable her. The attacker cursed when he realized he'd mostly missed his target. He lunged forward, trying to get closer for another attempt with the spray. But the nurse was already moving. She kicked out hard, her foot connecting with his wrist. The impact sent the pepper spray canister flying into the darkness of the surrounding bushes. Now they were back on even ground. "You're really starting to annoy me," the man snarled, rubbing his wrist where her kick had landed. "And you picked the wrong person to attack," the nurse replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. What happened next was a blur of movement. The attacker charged forward like a bull, trying to use his weight advantage to tackle her to the ground. The nurse sidestepped at the last second, using his momentum against him. As he stumbled past, she delivered a hammer fist to the back of his shoulder, striking the nerve bundle there. The attacker's arm went temporarily numb from the blow. He spun around, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. This was supposed to be an easy target, a tired woman walking alone at night. Instead, he was facing someone who fought back with the precision of a trained fighter. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, keeping his distance now, circling warily. The nurse didn't answer. She didn't need to explain herself to this man. Instead, she kept her focus, maintained her stance, and watched for his next move. The slight burning on her arm from the pepper spray was a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. In the distance, she heard voices, other people entering the park. The attacker heard them too. His eyes darted toward the sound, then back to the nurse. She could see him calculating his options. "This isn't over," he threatened, backing away slowly. "It is for tonight," she replied firmly. The man turned to run, but the nurse wasn't about to let him escape that easily. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. With shaking fingers, she snapped several photos of the retreating figure. The quality wasn't great in the dim light, but it was better than nothing. As the attacker disappeared into the darkness, the nurse finally allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had just happened. Her legs trembled as the adrenaline that had kept her going began to subside. She leaned against a nearby tree, taking deep breaths to steady herself. The voices she'd heard were getting closer, a group of late-night joggers coming around the bend in the path. Relief washed over her. She wasn't alone anymore. "Hey, are you okay?" called out one of the joggers, a woman who had spotted her leaning against the tree. The nurse straightened up, wincing slightly at the soreness already developing where the attacker had hit her face. "I need to report an assault," she said clearly. "Someone just tried to rob me." "Oh my God," the jogger said, rushing over. "Did he hurt you? Did he take anything?" The nurse shook her head. "He tried," she said, a hint of pride in her voice, "but I didn't let him." As the joggers gathered around, offering help and calling the police, the nurse thought about how differently this night could have ended if she hadn't taken those self-defense classes 4 years ago. The decision to learn how to protect herself had paid off in ways she never truly believed would happen. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, took the nurse's statement while a 3rd officer searched the area where the attack had happened. The group of joggers stayed with her, offering water and a jacket when they noticed her shivering, not from cold, but from the adrenaline crash. "You fought him off?" the female officer asked, looking impressed as she wrote in her notepad. "That's not something we hear every day." The nurse nodded, touching her cheek where a bruise was already starting to form. "I've been taking self-defense classes for years. Never thought I'd actually need to use what I learned." "Well, I'm glad you did," the officer replied. "We've had 3 similar attacks in this area over the last month. All women walking alone, all around this time of night. None of the other victims were able to fight back." The male officer looked up from his radio. "We might have something. A patrol car just picked up someone matching your description about 6 blocks from here. Would you be willing to take a look? No pressure, but it would really help if you could identify him." The nurse took a deep breath. The thought of seeing her attacker again sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her body, but she nodded firmly. "Yes, I can do that." 20 minutes later, she sat in the back of a police car as they drove to where the suspect was being held. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. One of the joggers had offered to come along for moral support, and the nurse was grateful for the company. They pulled up beside another police car. Through the window, the nurse could see a man in handcuffs sitting in the back seat, an officer standing guard nearby. "Take your time," the female officer told her gently. "Just look and tell us if that's him." The nurse steeled herself and looked. Even in the dim light of the street lamp, she recognized him immediately. The same build, the same hoodie, now with the hood down revealing close-cropped hair. What struck her most was how ordinary he looked. Not a monster, just a man who made terrible choices. "That's him," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's definitely him." The officers nodded. He had the pepper spray canister on him, along with 3 phones that aren't his and a wallet belonging to someone else. "We've been looking for this guy for weeks." As they drove back to the park where her statement would be completed, the nurse felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that her attacker had been caught, pride in her ability to defend herself, and a lingering sense of shock that it had happened at all. "The detective will want to speak with you tomorrow," the officer explained as they arrived back at the park. "But for tonight, is there someone who can stay with you? You shouldn't be alone after something like this." The nurse thought about her empty apartment, her cat waiting by the door. She pulled out her phone and called her best friend, who lived just 10 minutes away. The friend answered on the second ring, her voice sleepy but instantly alert when she heard what had happened. "I'm coming right over," she said without hesitation. "Don't even think about being alone tonight." After the call, the nurse looked up at the officers. "My friend is coming to get me. She'll stay at my place tonight." The female officer nodded approvingly. "Good. And here's my card with the case number. The detective will call you tomorrow, but you can reach me if you need anything before then." As they waited for her friend to arrive, the nurse stared across the dark park, seeing it with new eyes. The shadows that had seemed so threatening now seemed to be retreating. She had faced one of her worst fears and survived, not just survived, but fought back. One of the joggers touched her arm gently. "You know, you're kind of amazing," she said. "Most people would have just given up their stuff." The nurse managed a small smile. "I'm just glad I took those classes," she replied. "Really glad." In the distance, she could see headlights approaching, her friend arriving to take her home. Despite everything, she felt stronger than she had just hours before. The night had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next few days passed in a blur for the nurse. She took 2 days off work, something she rarely did. Her supervisor at the hospital had insisted after hearing what happened. "You take care of everyone else all the time," her supervisor had said during their phone call. "Now it's time to take care of yourself." Her apartment became a revolving door of concerned friends bringing food, checking on her, and offering support. Her best friend stayed that first night, sleeping on the couch despite the nurse's insistence that she was okay. "I'm not leaving you alone," her friend had said firmly, arranging blankets on the couch, while the orange cat watched with suspicious eyes from his perch on the bookshelf. On the second day, the detective called. They wanted her to come to the station to give a formal statement. The evidence against her attacker was strong: the pepper spray, the stolen items from other victims, and most importantly, her testimony and identification. "We've linked him to 5 other attacks in the area," the detective explained when she arrived at the station. "You're the only one who successfully fought him off. The others were robbed, and 2 were injured badly enough to need hospital treatment." The nurse sat in the interview room, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of mediocre coffee. "Will they have to testify?" she asked. "The other victims." The detective shook his head. "With the evidence we have, plus your statement and identification, we're hoping for a plea deal. He's looking at multiple felony counts. His lawyer will likely advise him to take whatever deal we offer rather than go to trial." After finishing at the police station, the nurse walked to her car feeling lighter somehow. There was something empowering about knowing that her actions had helped catch someone who had hurt others. On the drive home, she made a decision. That evening, she called her self-defense instructor. "I heard what happened," her instructor said immediately. "Word spreads fast. How are you holding up?" "Better than I expected," the nurse replied honestly. "Actually, I was wondering about something. Do you ever need assistant instructors for your beginner classes?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you offering?" "I think I am," the nurse said, surprising herself with how right it felt. "What happened to me?" "I keep thinking about the other victims, the ones who couldn't fight back. I want to help change that." Her instructor's voice was warm with approval. "I think you'd be perfect. Your medical background would be a bonus too. Why don't you come to the training center tomorrow? We can talk about it more." That night, the nurse slept better than she had since the attack. The bruise on her cheek was turning a yellowish green, but it would fade. What wouldn't fade was the knowledge she now carried, that she was stronger than she'd realized. The following day, she returned to work at the hospital. Her co-workers were supportive, but didn't make a big deal of her return, which she appreciated. During her lunch break, she checked her phone and found a message from one of the joggers who had helped her that night. "Just checking in," the message read. "Hope you're doing okay. The police officer told me they caught the guy because of you. You're a hero." The nurse smiled at the word hero. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt like someone who had refused to be a victim. After her shift ended, she drove straight to the training center where she'd learned to defend herself. The familiar smell of the practice mats and the sound of students practicing their moves felt comforting now. Her instructor greeted her with a respectful nod. "Ready to help others find their inner warrior?" the instructor asked. The nurse looked around the room at the women and men of all ages learning the same techniques that had saved her. Some looked confident, others nervous. All of them were there for the same reason. They didn't want to feel helpless if the worst happened. "Yes," she said with certainty, "I'm ready." What had started as the worst night of her life was somehow turning into something meaningful. Something that might help others avoid what she'd gone through, or at least give them a fighting chance. 6 months had passed since that night in the park. The leaves that had rustled in the trees during the attack had fallen and been replaced by fresh green growth. The nurse no longer took the shortcut through the park after dark, not out of fear, but out of common sense. Some risks weren't worth taking, no matter how well you could defend yourself. Her attacker had accepted a plea deal, just as the detective had predicted. He would serve 8 years for multiple counts of assault and robbery. The nurse had felt a strange mix of emotions when she heard the news: relief, satisfaction, but also an unexpected twinge of sadness for a life gone so wrong. Today was special, though. Today marked her first time leading a self-defense class entirely on her own. Her instructor had been mentoring her for months and finally felt she was ready. The community center classroom was filled with women of all ages. Some looked nervous, others determined. A few chatted quietly while waiting for class to begin. The nurse took a deep breath, centering herself before stepping to the front of the room. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice clear and confident. "Welcome to Women's Self-Defense Basics. I'm your instructor today." 20 pairs of eyes focused on her. She smiled, remembering how nervous she had been at her first class 4 years ago. "Before we begin, I want to tell you something important," she continued. "Self-defense isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being smart, being aware, and knowing how to use what you have." She moved around the front of the room, making eye contact with the participants. "Some of you might be wondering if these techniques really work in real life," she said. "That's a fair question. The honest answer is yes, they can, but they're not magic. They require practice and commitment." A woman in the back raised her hand. "Had you ever had to use these techniques? Like for real?" The nurse nodded, touching her cheek where the bruise had long since faded. "Yes, 6 months ago, I was attacked in the park not far from here. The training I'm about to share with you helped me fight back and escape." A murmur went through the room. The nurse hadn't planned to share her story so early in the class, but it felt right. These women deserved honesty. "I'm not telling you this to scare you," she added quickly. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that I understand what brings many of you here. Fear, worry, the desire to feel safe when walking alone. And I want you to know that what we're doing here matters." For the next hour, she guided the class through basic techniques: how to break a grip, how to strike effectively, how to create distance between yourself and an attacker. She watched as the women practiced, correcting stances and offering encouragement. By the end of the class, everyone was slightly sweaty and smiling with newfound confidence. As they gathered their belongings, several women approached to thank her. "I've been afraid to go running by myself for years," one woman told her. "Maybe now I can start again." Another woman, barely out of her teens, said quietly, "My boyfriend gets angry sometimes. He's never hit me, but I just want to know I can protect myself just in case." The nurse gave her the card of a domestic violence counselor along with extra information about the self-defense program. "This might help too," she said gently. After everyone had left, her instructor appeared at the doorway, smiling proudly. "How did it feel?" The nurse smiled back. "Like coming full circle," she replied. "When I was attacked, I felt like a victim for those first few seconds. Now I'm helping others make sure they never have to feel that way." As they walked out of the community center together, the nurse looked up at the early evening sky. Her life had changed direction in ways she never could have predicted that night 6 months ago. One terrible moment had led to something powerful, not just her own strength, but the chance to help others find theirs. The attacker who had thought she was an easy target had unwittingly set her on this new path. He had hit the wrong woman that night. And because of that mistake, dozens of other women would learn to fight back like warriors too. What had begun as her story was becoming something bigger, a ripple effect of strength and confidence spreading through her community, one class at a time.